Ashley Michaels, and this is Colorado Point of View. We still have a long way to go before the next big election cycle in 2026, but we are starting to see new candidates jump into races for statewide offices. This week, we're focusing on who will be the next state treasurer. Democrat Dave Young has held the position since the 2018 election, but now he's approaching his term limit. That means we will see voters choose someone new to take over the state's finances in 2026. So far, 2 people have officially filed paperwork with the state. No Republicans on the list yet, but John Mikos is running. He's the former El Paso County chair for the Democratic Party, and so is Democrat Jerry DiTullio, who's the treasurer in Jefferson County. But this week, a third candidate also announced her campaign for state treasurer. We're talking about Democratic State Representative Brianna Titone from Arvada, also seeking the state office. And that's who we have in studio with us here today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. All right, let's jump right into the conversation. First and foremost, why do you want to be a state treasurer?
Well, I mean, I've been in the legislature for 6 years, going on 8. Public service has been something that is really deep in my heart. It goes back from when I was a volunteer firefighter when I was 16, and serving the community is extremely important to me. So finding another office to run for after being termed out of the House was something I wanted to do, and I wanted to take it to the next level. And I think that the experience I've gained in the legislature, as well as the skills and the knowledge I bring to the table, will make me a good leader in this role for treasurer.
Now, when it comes to the state's finances, and we do talk a lot about that here on the show, often we're talking about what the governor is saying. People are looking to people like the governor or even the state legislature. As treasurer, would you hope to be a bigger part of that conversation when people are talking about the state's finances?
The treasurer does have some role in it, and as you and your viewers probably know, the budget is actually controlled by the legislature and the Joint Budget Committee in particular. The treasurer is the person who gives the money out, has the different savings accounts for business loans, the secure savings, the unclaimed property program. So there's a bunch of different programs in there, and really being a fiduciary of the money is what the treasurer does. The legislature doesn't exactly have to have the fiduciary role, but the treasurer does, and that's something that in my legislative career I've been trying to build that trust, so people know that selecting me as the person to be entrusted with the money is a good choice, because I have a good track record of doing that.
I want to ask you a little bit about, if you win, what are some of your goals in that office for ensuring financial success for the state?
Well, I mean, one of the big things is the unclaimed property program, and we just had a bill today in committee about it, maybe not when this is viewed as today, but it's to modernize the unclaimed property program. And maybe some of your viewers don't know, but if you go to thegreatcopayback.com, you can go see if you have money that's yours that you can claim. There's $2 billion of money out in the cash fund in the Treasury for people to claim. So that's one thing that I want to make sure we're doing anything and everything possible to make sure we reunite that money with the people. Also, the retirement program, PARA, is one of the roles that the treasurer has, being sure that we're making good investments in PARA, that we're making sure that when people are ready to retire, that the money is there for them to retire. These are the kinds of things that the treasurer does, and having experience in the legislature makes it easy for me to work with the legislature and the governor to make sure that we're having policies that the Treasury can use to help facilitate finding different ways of having different sources of money and creative uses of money, because Tabor forces us to be so creative in how we find and use that money. I think that this is something that someone with some outside the box thinking could really make some good headway.
And I will ask you about Tabor here in just a second. But before we do, we just went through the list of people that we know you'll be running against in the primary. We do expect that list to grow. But what do you think sets you apart from everybody else in this race?
I mean, I don't have a finance background, but I have dabbled in finance in my own personal life, having mutual funds and stock trading since I was 18 years old, as soon as I got a bank account. But this role is a leadership role, and it's, as I said before, having outside the box thinking is how we're going to get through some of these tough times that we see ahead. The budget currently is very, very challenging right now. We're looking at over $1 billion to shave off of the budget. So how can we find different ways of getting money to people? The unclaimed property is one of those things. I have another idea that I'm not going to share with you today, but you'll be hearing about it soon, of trying to get people more money in their pockets at no cost to the people of Colorado or the state. So these are the kinds of things that I think once people see the ideas that I have, they're going to see it's very clear that I'm the right leader for this role, because I don't have to find all the conventions to go through what we do. We have to think outside the box.
Now, you've gone over your resume as a state lawmaker, and when you were first elected, you did make history as the first openly transgender lawmaker elected here in the state of Colorado. And if you go on to win this election, you'd also be the first in the country to hold statewide office. Is that important to you?
It's not something I can really shake off. It's something that, if I do get elected, that will be one of those facts. There was a state board of election winner in Hawaii who was a trans woman, so she did win a statewide election, but not at an executive level, where this is really where I would be the first. But being historic, I think, in the context of where politics and where our government is headed, we are in unprecedented times where we're seeing a constitutional crisis emerge right before our eyes, where judges are saying to the Trump administration, you can't do this, and they're saying, no, that's okay, we're still going to do that. The three equal branches of government are not functioning the way they should. So every election that we have from now until we fix this problem is going to be historic. Me being a trans person in this time, I think, is particularly important because of the scrutiny and the strife of trans people put on us by this administration. So to be a person who wins as a trans person in this kind of role could really help give people some hope in all of this storm of trouble that's being stirred up by this administration.
Let's talk a little bit more about the money.
Yes.
So we talked that the state has a big budget shortfall right now. I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think we do to fix it?
Well, we need more money. And that's not to say that, we need more money in the sense that some people will take that out of context. But Tabor, as you said, you wanted to mention before, has put artificial restrictions on our budget that have been hindering us and have been forcing us to create more and more creative ways of finding the money to do things through fees and enterprises and all of these different mechanisms. We have to get out from under that. And what I tell people about Tabor is that, would you get on a cruise ship if the captain could only steer and operate the ship if the people on the ship voted to tell him how to do it? I don't think anybody would buy a ticket for that cruise, because that sounds a bit chaotic to me, especially if the ship just careens into an object in the front because no one can decide. This is kind of where we're headed because we have so many restrictions. The elected representatives should be trusted enough to be able to make decisions when we need to make tough decisions. That has always been the way every other state really works, that the elected people can make the decisions and raise funds when there's a problem and when you need to turn the ship and move it away from an obstacle. That is something we have to solve. Will it be up to the people to solve? to decide. I hope they will understand at this point that we are headed in a direction that is hard to overcome and hard to get out of. And if we don't do something in 2026, we may not have enough money to actually pay everything in 2027. And that is not because of overspending. That is because of these artificial caps. In 1992, when Tabor came into place, we didn't have expensive IT systems. We didn't have the population and the roads to maintain. We have all of these things that were never conceived of, and we've had to live under this artificial rate of change over time that just is not sustainable.
And so, to be clear for our viewers, would you be in favor of getting rid of it altogether?
I'm open to the conversation of how we do it. I don't know exactly how we do it, but I know that there at least some components need to be addressed. Which ones and how we can legally get past that is up to a lot of the attorneys to figure out. Can we just overturn Tabor in one shot? I don't think it's possible. So we'll have to see what the voters really agree with to see if we can find a path forward.
Well, thanks for the conversation on everyone's favorite topic, of course, the state's finances. We always appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
All right. Thanks very much.
Well, coming up after the break, our analysts will be in studio with their take on some of the headlines coming from Washington, D.C. Stick around. Welcome back. President Trump held his first cabinet meeting of his new term this week, but it was someone who is not a cabinet secretary that's dominating the headlines. Elon Musk, tasked with making the federal government more efficient, seemed to be the focus for much of that meeting. He said he's, quote, taking a lot of flack and getting a lot of death threats over his directives to cut spending and jobs. Some federal agencies told their staff to ignore a recent directive from Musk requiring federal employees to email in their accomplishments from the past week or face possible termination. But Energy Secretary Chris Wright, who's from Colorado, says overall the cabinet is happy to work with Elon Musk.
Yeah, it is a partnership between all of the departments and Elon Musk and the Doge effort. We all want the same thing. We got to get more efficient. We got to lower our costs. And I would say the teams are working together great. It's fast. Of course, you bump elbows or whatever, but we are on the same team working together well. And I'm very optimistic about the results you'll see on that. We're going to make government less expensive, more efficient, and deliver better results.
All right, so let's bring in our analysts. As always, we have Democratic strategist and senior presidential and gubernatorial advisor Andy Boyan, and Republican strategist and director of Advance Colorado, Michael Fields. Thank you both for being here. Always appreciate it. All right, Michael, I want to start with you on this. I mean, what are some of your key takeaways from the first cabinet meeting and what we just heard Secretary Wright say?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that the administration is very transparent, very accessible. I mean, the media's in there, they're doing questions, they're talking for an hour. I mean, you're constantly having, whether that is press conferences or, off-the-cuff meetings on things. So I think the accessibility is a big thing. Obviously, Elon is in the middle of a lot of this, a lot of the questions. He's able to talk pretty early on. And Trump obviously has a lot of faith in him that he's trying to cut inefficiencies, cut waste. Obviously, it has been bumpy at some times, but it seems like a lot of that is getting figured out. And I think the key is that the cabinet is behind what is going on. I think that's important. And the fact that a lot of these cabinet picks have gotten through. I mean, we haven't seen any cabinet members that have gotten shot down by the Senate. Some of them have been close. But I think, the focus on the big issues, how do you lower costs, but how do you make sure the government's more efficient, immigration. There was some talk in this meeting about foreign policy, which is important. And so there's a lot of topics that I think were brought up, that will continue to be brought up, that were relevant to people's lives right now. And so I think it was a good first meeting for them.
Andy, I want to hear from you. What are some of your takeaways from this first cabinet meeting?
So let me just set the stage for a second. So they opened the cabinet meeting with a prayer. And then after that, the first person to speak is a non-elected, unofficial billionaire, richest man in the world, to speak for about 30 minutes to the cabinet, who was, as Michael said, approved by the U.S. Senate. So we didn't even have anybody that was appointed to the cabinet open this cabinet meeting. I think it's really too bad. I think it's unfortunate, and I think they're going in the wrong direction in several ways. One of the things the president was quoted as saying is, if you have a problem with Elon Musk, you're out. So it's Elon or nothing at this point for his cabinet, which I think spells trouble for a lot of things. But I know Chris Wright. He's a friend of mine. I have great respect for Chris Wright and his work and the way he's done things is exactly on point. I'm not sure that he wasn't given a set of talking points in that quote to say, because I would find it very hard to believe that Chris Wright is 100% behind Elon Musk, who doesn't seem to have direction, who admitted Elon did in the cabinet meeting that he's making mistakes. He's firing nuclear scientists that have secret codes. He's firing people that are working on anti-vaccine work. So he's really kind of a colossal mess. And he goes to the cabinet meeting also in a hat. I've been in a cabinet meeting with the United States president, and I just think the decorum's poor. The way he's running this is poor. And I think he needs to go build cars or build spaceships and go on his way.
The fact that he's been so front and center, what kind of tone do you think this meeting sets as we go forward?
I think it's a very good point. I think that's the question to ask is, what exactly are we saying when we bring him in there, when we have him speak for most of the meeting, and we have threats from the United States president, who is duly elected, who says, if you don't like this, get out. I mean, that tone in and of itself is not a democracy, and it's certainly not an opportunity for these cabinet members to speak freely. It's whatever we say that the president says we need to say, we have to say. That's a problem.
Yeah, Michael, your take on Musk being so front and center.
Yeah, I think that it is obviously on purpose that they're pushing it and pushing it even harder. But I think the key to this is we have a Washington, D.C., a Congress, et cetera, that people don't like the direction. They don't trust that they're being efficient with their money. They think there's a lot of waste there. Bringing in people that know what they're doing in the private sector, including Chris Wright, who's run a successful business, I think that is the tone that is being set, is saying, we're going to look at every piece of this government, see, is it working for you, or are we wasting money? And then the other talk in that cabinet meeting was on some of the foreign policy issues, some of the policy issues about Medicaid, et cetera. I think those were important discussions, too.
Okay, so one of the policy issues that came out of not only that meeting, but just an idea out of the White House this week, deals with both the budget and immigration. So the idea is, instead of a traditional green card, people from other countries could also apply for what's called a gold card here in the U.S. It would cost $5 million. It would provide a pathway to citizenship for wealthy immigrants. The president says companies could also buy them in order to get visas for employees. Now, some other countries already do have a similar program, but my question for both of you, is this a smart strategy for the U.S.? Michael?
I think if it's done the right way, as you mentioned, there are a lot of other countries that do stuff like this. I think the key is that these people will be vetted. You have to make sure you know who's coming into your country, but it is a way to, slightly pay down the deficit, for example, and it is bringing in people that can create jobs. I don't think that's a bad idea. What it shouldn't be doing, obviously, is replacing the normal system where people can come in despite whatever income level they're at, where they're trying to make a better life for themselves. I think that's important. But I think it brings this discussion about immigration reform. What are we trying to do? Who are we letting in? Are we vetting it? There's been a colossal failure by the Biden administration in the last 4 years, letting in millions and millions of people that we don't know anything about them and that they're here. I think the biggest focus should be on securing the border, should be on deporting violent criminals. But I think this is a step in the right direction of thinking, who do we want here? How are we vetting them? How do we make our immigration system better?
Andy, what do you think of this new strategy?
I have to laugh to start with for two reasons. One thing Michael brought up is this actually replaces the EB-5 visa program. So this actually does replace, for those who can't get in and spend $5 million, it's actually going to replace that entire program. So this is bringing in wealthy people, those who can afford $5 million, and it's dystopian in its nature. And also, it does have some echoes of the European golden visas that they've had for years. So there is some strategy behind it, but the way he introduced it and what he said so far, he's had several people say, including former John Bolton, who says he's not all there. That was his quote. It does invite tax breaks for the wealthy. So if you look at the program and actually read what it's about, it gives tax breaks for the wealthy. And also, some former NSA members have said it could invite fraud, it could invite national security risks. So all of that put together, if you actually put Trump and selling a gold card in the same sentence, that just naturally, for rational, very everyday Americans, they know that's going to invite fraud. It doesn't make any sense. So to Michael's point, I think it's very well said. It does replace the EB-5 program. So those that can't afford it can't come. It makes no sense. It's actually meant for the elite, and it's dystopian, and it makes me sad for our country, actually.
It'll be certainly something to watch. Okay, so let's talk about what's coming up next week. So on Tuesday, President Trump will deliver his first State of the Union address of his new term. We've got about 30 seconds for each of you. What do you expect to hear? What are you hoping to hear? How do you think it's going to go? Andy, we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So I think what he's going to do, obviously, now is going to list his grievances from the previous administration. So he'll talk about what Biden did wrong and why we need to fix it, and how he has saved the country. I think he's going to promise milk and honey for the country for the next 4 years. I think he's going to say he's here to save us. He's the best he's ever been, that kind of thing. But I think what you're going to find at the end of the day is he's ripping Medicaid away from people like my own mother, who counts on Medicaid. So I think actually what's going to happen Tuesday night is going to be a lot about himself, about how bad the Democrat and the liberal left is, and how he's here to save the country. I think it's going to be unfortunate.
Michael, what do you see happening on Tuesday?
I think that you need to provide some clarity on some of these big issues. Did a little bit of that in the cabinet meeting, but looking at Ukraine, looking at immigration, looking at how you drive the cost of living down. I think on the policy front, he has to be very clear. But they were 6 weeks into his administration, and I think overall, you look at that 50% approval rating he has, that's pretty strong. We'll see if he can continue that down the stretch here.
I'm sure we'll be talking about it next week. Thank you both for being here. Always appreciate it. Coming up next, a Colorado congresswoman is going viral after bringing her newborn to the House floor. That's coming up after the break. Colorado Democratic Congresswoman Brittany Pettersen took to the House floor this week with her 4-week-old son in her arms. She's been pushing for a rule change that would allow new parents to vote by proxy. Currently, in order to vote, a lawmaker has to be present inside the Capitol to cast that vote themselves. So Pettersen says she had to fly from Colorado to the Capitol with her newborn because the budget bill was too important to miss.
I rise today with my newborn Sam, who's just 4 weeks old. Unfortunately, I wasn't given the opportunity to vote remotely after giving birth, but I wasn't going to let that stop me from being here to represent my constituents and vote no on this disastrous Republican budget proposal.
Well, we are going to deliver the America First agenda. We're going to deliver all of it, not just parts of it, and this was the first step in that process.
Now, we talked a lot about that budget proposal last week after House Republicans first introduced it. Well, this week it passed. The votes fell almost exclusively along party lines. The bill includes measures on border security, tax, and energy provisions. The Senate passed a competing plan just last week. Theirs looks to avoid large cuts to Medicaid, while the House does want cuts to the programs. Republicans will now need to align those two spending proposals to push President Trump's agenda forward ahead of a budget deadline in March. Well, thanks so much for joining in on the conversation. For Colorado Point of View, I'm Ashley Michaels. We will see you right back here next week.